Things happen in the plant that adults aren't comfortable seeing. You walk through the plant, you can't walk through it without getting animal parts on you or blood all over you.
Desde muy principio, cuando entro en la puerta principal, veo el pollo, la sangre, las tripas.
You walk into the building, but the operation's enormous. And as we walked, I was just like, that's a kid. That's a kid.
Keep your head down, stay low, don't get noticed. You have to be very naive to look at some of these kids and go, they're over 18.
When nighttime falls, more than 1,300 slaughterhouses across the country must be scrubbed top to bottom. Former workers say cleaning what's called the kill floor is dangerous work. The floor, a slippery combination of blood, animal fat, harsh chemicals, and hot water. NBC News conducted a year-long investigation, interviewing dozens of slaughterhouse employees, whistleblowers, local authorities, and government officials. After reviewing thousands of pages of internal company documents, police reports, and accident records, what we found was striking. NBC News discovered that the hiring of children as young as 14 to work in slaughterhouses was pervasive, an ongoing practice happening in plain sight in towns across the country. Some calling it an open secret. In 2023 alone, almost 6,000 kids were working illegally across industries in the U.S., with the agency investigating more than 800 child labor cases in 47 states. Some experts say today's tight labor market is in part to blame for an 88% spike in children being illegally employed across all industries since 2019. As a result, more underage children are working in dangerous conditions. Some employees look young but are over 18. Others are clearly children. One of those kids was working here in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Duon Perez was working the night shift at Marjack Poultry in July when he was killed after getting sucked into equipment that accidentally turned on. He was 16 years old. His uncle told us he was a happy teenager.
Nunca él se enojaba, nunca él siempre todo era bien sonriente. Yo todos los días voy, todas las tardes voy a ver a mi hermana, ella está destrozada. Es su primer hijo, está destrozado, o sea, nadie le puede quitar ese dolor por ella.
Duon worked overnight at the slaughterhouse and by day attended middle school here, a few grades behind other kids his age. He wasn't the first person to get caught in a machine and die at the plant.
A 48-year-old man died from his injuries following an accident that happened at the Marjack Poultry plant in Hattiesburg on Monday night.
Duon came to the U.S. from Guatemala in the last decade with his family. But in the last 2 years, more than 250,000 migrant children have arrived in this country alone, without their parents. Almost half are from Guatemala. This is where Duon grew up, in Huizpache, Guatemala, an impoverished mountain village. His uncle said Duon and his family wanted a better life for themselves.
Muchacho porque se fue con una necesidad. Normalmente acá la extrema pobreza siempre existe. Por esa razón la gente se va para Estados Unidos. Se fue por más que por la escasez de la vida aquí, por bajos recursos, usted como lo ve, donde ellos vivían, esta es la casa de la familia, pero solo ellos vivían como rentado aquí en esta casa, entonces por eso se decidieron ir a Estados Unidos.
With so many people leaving for the U.S., aspects of everyday life in Guatemala are changing. The migration of children alone is having an impact. NBC News found that in the last 15 years, more than 1,500 schools have shut down in Guatemala, including many rural schools along the border with Mexico. In Duon's region alone, 23 schools have shut down. One Guatemalan government agency notes the demand for education is decreasing, in part because kids are leaving for the United States. Many end up in towns like this one.
There's not main chain restaurants. There is very little entertainment. There's one movie theater and that's it. We don't have like a bowling alley or a skating ring or anything like that. What moves the money here is the meat packing plants.
Dodge City is about 1,000 miles northwest of Hattiesburg. It's one of many small Midwestern towns Central American migrants now call home. All of these communities have one or more slaughterhouses driving the local economy.
There are people here who are wanting to bring other family members. So they contact the smugglers and they say, listen, I have a family member who wants to come here. And sadly, the smugglers, they have their price.
Vivir en Guatemala es muy triste porque ahí es donde se vive la extrema pobreza.
This adult Marjack slaughterhouse worker told us they are employed legally. They asked NBC News if they could stay anonymous out of fear of losing their job. They're one of many who came from Guatemala to work at the plant.
Y aparte de eso, hay días también que no teníamos nada que comer. Teníamos que partir un huevo en 5 pedazos.
They are supposed to pay that money back within 1 or 2 years. Because the sooner they pay back, the sooner they can bring other family members. So that's the circle.
We spoke exclusively to a former manager at slaughterhouse cleaner Packers Sanitation Services, Inc., or PSSI. They asked to stay anonymous out of fear of repercussions from speaking out.
You're around all kinds of sharp instruments, a lot of them automated. They're not mature enough to understand that these things are going to hurt them, and a lot of times will kill you if you don't treat it right. You have to respect their machinery, and you have to turn it off.
PSSI paid a $1.5 million civil penalty in 2023 for violating child labor laws, but maintains they did not knowingly hire children. PSSI told us they have a zero-tolerance policy against employing anyone under the age of 18. And they said they've implemented enhanced screening processes and technologies in their hiring practices. Shannon Rebolledo is a U.S. Labor Department investigator. Her findings led to PSSI being penalized for employing children.
You walk into the building, but the operation's enormous. And as we walked, I was just like, that's a kid. That's a kid. And so we would stop and talk to them briefly. We found a systemic failure on the company's part. There were over 102 children that we verified their age and their identities that were working the night shift. You know, as I'm pulling my children out of bed to go to school in the mornings, I'm thinking, you know, they have this comfortable bed, they had a good night of sleep, and they have to go to school. And how are these other children who've worked this, not just a regular job, but a taxing job all night, getting up and having the same expectations? Like, do they have the same chance that my kids have? It's dangerous. It's prohibited, and it's prohibited for a reason, because it's so dangerous.
You have to act like an adult. You have to behave like an adult. You have to perform like an adult. And if you mess up, you get treated like an adult.
And they get paid like adults, often well above minimum wage. Many immigrants are desperate for these jobs to feed their families.
Aquí gano $100 al día y en Guatemala gano $1 al día. Es mucho la diferencia. Y yo estoy muy agradecido con este país, con Dios. Estoy muy agradecido porque ahora sí no me hace falta nada.
So there's some real pressures on them to try to find work.
Attorney Larry Stein has represented Marjack for more than 3 decades. He agreed to talk to us about Duon's death.
The people they're paying loans to get up to here, and I don't think they're the loan people that are very kind, shall we say.
Is it hard to fill these jobs with legal people who are legally allowed to work in the United States?
It is hard, yes, it is.
Is it impossible?
I don't know if it's impossible, but it's hard.
Some workers at Marjack use stolen identities to get their jobs, a fact communicated to the company and law enforcement. NBC News obtained police reports showing that for years, Americans complained to Marjack and called the local police. They say their identities were stolen by Marjack workers who used their social security numbers to get jobs at the plant. We discovered that at the time of his death, 16-year-old Duon had used the identity of a 32-year-old man to get his job, according to the company.
Was the company surprised to learn that Duon was 16 years old?
Yes, they were surprised. That I can tell you, they were surprised and somewhat horrified.
If you could look at this too, I mean, do you think that he looks 32 years old?
No, he did not look 32, but he might have looked 18.
So how could it be news to Marjack that there were people working there under fake IDs if they got these calls previously?
Well, because then you have to depend, now you're depending on the credibility. Is the person calling or is the person there? And we're limited. They gave us this documentation. We cannot look into it.
Stein says the company's hands are tied.
We are prohibited by law from going beyond that system. I know that's sad reality, but that's the one that frankly, all employers in the United States operate under.
We asked Shannon Rebolledo with the Department of Labor if a company generally was responsible if they'd been duped with fake papers.
So the company is responsible for following the child labor provisions, which says that you can't work in a meatpacking capacity until you're 18 years of age. And they are required to do due diligence.
We've now put signs on all over the facilities, and every entrance, no one under 18 may enter. And we put it in English and we put it in Spanish.
Marjack says that Duon was hired by an outside staffing company, and that Marjack now requires that company to provide a photo when someone applies for a job. The federal government has not fined Marjack. If they do, the maximum fine for hiring a child is $15,138 per instance.
Do those fines actually have an impact on how these companies do business?
I think the publicity of having something like that is far worse than the penalty. Nobody wants to be seen to hire a child.
One source at the plant told us they worried children were still employed even after Duon's death. We asked Marjack, and they told us they have reviewed its entire workforce and does not believe they are employing anyone under 18.
Can you say definitively that there are no more children working for Marjack?
Lord, there's no way I could ever say that definitively.
Marjack slaughters approximately 2 million chickens per week across multiple facilities. NBC News learned that some of the chicken processed at Marjack goes to ChickfilA.
Como los jefes de la tienda ChickfilA a chequear a cómo hacen el producto. Entonces ya luego los supervisores nos avisan a nosotros que por favor hagan bien el trabajo porque van a pasar los jefes del ChickfilA a chequear el trabajo.
The worker also told us that every year employees are given a coupon for a free Chick-fil-A sandwich. We've reached out to Chick-fil-A to ask for a comment on their relationship with Marjack in light of 16-year-old Duon's death. A spokesperson told NBC News, "We are reviewing our own procedures for investigation and response as we pursue the steps necessary to effectively hold all our suppliers to our high safety standards." As NBC News documented instances of child labor across the country, it started to become clear how prevalent the issue is throughout many American communities.
Tyson Foods and Purdue Farms, they're finding themselves under federal investigation.
Department of Labor says when IT America Incorporated violated child labor laws.
Is at the forefront of a new report that accuses a food manufacturer of violating child labor laws.
Gerber's Poultry, famous for their Amish farm chicken.
Our kids are not for sale.
Now Congress is scrambling to figure out how to fix this issue.
Ya no puede hablar, ya no va a decir buenos días abuelo, buenos días tía. nunca. El muchacho salió, se despidió de su abuela, de sus tíos, de sus familiares y lamentable va a regresar y una caja
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.